We have a question over here.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but when you have stores like that of that caliber, I'm not sure if there are enough people here necessarily to justify that. I mean, one of the major concerns that everyone talks about here is having a couple of companies or stores, and they are a monopoly, just by virtue of being so big in such a small nation. And then everyone's talking about how to break them up and let the market run its course. So, I mean, in the U.S., it's all very nice in Beijing with the, 300 million people. In cities such as New York or Los Angeles, or where they're in the millions. Over here, I think it's a lot harder to have in a city of, I don't know, 20 to 50,000 people to have a store like that. You're knocking practically everyone else out of business.
What's the population of Jerusalem? What's the population of Jerusalem?
800,000.
So, I mean, it's a big city. These kind of stores are in all kinds of cities.
And how many would you have, though? You'd have one of these discount. Would many of these stores open in Israel? Because if not, then prices will not go down.
I can open 3 stores.
Okay, well, the first thing to do is, I would say that the first question is that we don't plan on how many of these stores open. There are small towns in the United States that have a Walmart and a Target, and these stores, the companies feel as though they are making enough of a return to have them stay in business. First of all, you lift the law that says these stores cannot come. You allow them in. And then if they want to come, if they think that they can sell products and make a go of it to Israelis, then they'll come. If they can't, then they won't. One mistake is feeling that the government just has to plan everything. It's a little bit like the graph we saw of Allende's war room, that he feels as though he has to plan the whole economy. So what you should be doing is lobbying for the government just to take its hands off and stop prohibiting companies that want to come and sell you things cheaply from doing that. And it goes also for products that are brought in. We all heard yesterday about Shapiro Brewery, and they were allowed to import the large brewing machinery tank, and then it came in 2 pieces. So the customs said it wasn't a brewing tank, so they were going to have to charge them duty on it, because the 2 pieces it came in, neither section by itself counted as a brewing tank. I mean, that's the kind of absurd regulation that slows down the economy. People should be allowed to import what they like, or at least for a far lower tariff than is the case right now. And I'm not suggesting anything drastic, but these tariffs could be reduced by 20% over a 5-year period, for example, to allow people to transition. So at the end of 5 years, there would be 0 tariffs and a lot more inexpensive imports. The problem is that there are entrenched interests which stand in the way. And it's you, the consumers, who need to fight against these entrenched interests, these rich, powerful firms that are just protecting their markets. These are the enemy, and the people who want to sell you things cheaply are your friends. Another thing, question over here again, or comment. Did you have something? No. Yes, Corinne.
No, I think there's happening issues like the problem with things. I mean, 10 years ago there was no Forever 21, there was no H&M, there was basically only Castro and Lenoir who were selling extraordinary, expensive items of very low quality. And the day they decided that actually they will introduce competition in the textile and the clothing industry, and they let chains, American chains or Dutch chains, like in the case of H&M. First of all, you can find them now, majority everywhere. They're in Ashdod, they're in Ashkelon, they're obviously in Jerusalem and Beersheba. And everybody uses them because the price is low, about half the price of what you would find in the Israeli chain. But better than that, I don't know if you have noticed, but now the prices in the Israeli store, like Castro and Renoir, actually went down because of the international competition. And they had to compete finally with Forever 21 and H&M. So exactly the same thing could happen in the food sector. There is no reason why Superstar is the only supermarket basically who is allowed to sell us food. And I think if Carrefour comes and Target, Walmart, you will get cheaper food.
Should actually be taken in order for that to happen. You have companies such as Tnuva, Unilever, who pretty much right now have control of a good 80-90% of the
Because they
market.
have a control of the imports, but Carrefour is an importer too. Carrefour imports product to France, and they will be also able to import product to Israel. So if you lift this, this monopoly on import, which is unique labor, which is, then you will get cheaper food. There is no reason why we pay 3 times the price of bottle of milk in Israel. The only reason is because it's a protected business by import.
Or else, or 3 times the price for kosher cheese. I can't understand why kosher cheese is less expensive in the United States than it is here. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
I mean that's right. It's a monopoly. It should be a monopoly. So we need to take off these monopolies. Yes, exactly.
More for the steamed chocolate bars that are made in Israel and put 100% made in the package where they're chocolate in Israel. You get more here than you do in shopping.
Well, no, the companies in Israel said that they're leaving them because they're trying to break into a country like the US. So they have to make it lower. They're losing money, but they're selling much less to get it any exposure.
It doesn't work that way with the kosher products because they're a monopoly of their own in the U.S. or other countries. No, but I'm saying there's only 2 companies in the world that make the kosher dark chocolate. There's only so many options. So you're already a monopoly when you walk in. There's the kosher aisle, and you buy out of the kosher aisle, and you in the big stores. So they don't have to have lower prices. They choose that way.
All right. A question over here, and then after we've had a couple of questions, we'll go on to the labor market and the tax.
It's not really a question. I think we should focus the problem because, from what I know, the big companies, the big sellers, are not the problem. I mean, Shufersal isn't the problem. They have a very small margin, and actually one of them just went under. I mean, Mega, the biggest company in Israel, just went under because they couldn't afford the discounts that needed to be given. So the problem is that the food market in Israel is very closed, and I think this is what actually need to be, targeted.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't think that Walmart is a problem. I think that, the society of milk that protects the prices of milk and owns the one producer in Israel is the main problem.
Okay, all right, well exactly. Well, this is a problem that needs to be tackled. We also need to tackle labor market reforms. It's difficult to hire people, it's difficult to fire people. Once you have them, you have to give them substantial benefits. If the cost of labor were to go down, then the cost of the products that they sell and the services would also go down. And this is, again, something the government can do without spending 1 shekel of its budget. They can just pass a different set of laws and have more flexibility. When there's more flexibility, employers are more willing to hire additional people, and because they know that they can just try them out, and then if they don't work, they can let them go. And there were disturbances in Paris a few years ago when Nicolas Sarkozy proposed this very kind of thing, but it wasn't from the poor people in what's called the banlieue, in the suburbs. It was from the elite in the middle of the city, the university graduates. They wanted to have their jobs continue to be protected. They wanted tenure. And if you don't have tenure, if you have fewer requirements on employers, they're more willing to hire. The cost of labor goes down, and the product prices goes down also. Yes.
I study economics by college. We understand that they measure all the index, I take as
Gini coefficient.
Index, sorry. And all the professor told us that it's wrong measure skill that we have. And you say the same because there's a lot of factors that do not go inside to this measure. But why we keep doing it? If we don't have the alternative or to find something that can work and to give realistic picture of the what is going on, because we stick with those skills that we try to measure all those the equipment, but it's not working.
Right. So you're saying, why do people keep teaching about the Gini coefficient?
And why this is like the only thing that we have to measure? Like, why people like didn't came up with something else that can take a lot of other parameters that it's not.
Well, it is difficult to describe everything in one measure, and economists often go on teaching things that have little use because they're already in the textbooks, they don't want to explore further. But there are a lot of people in the literature that have looked at new ways of measuring inequality, and I guess the Gini coefficient is something that is convenient for them to compare over countries, but as we've heard before, you should always be very, very wary of different measures that economists produce, and a lot of them, and a lot of the models use a lot of what's called simplifying assumptions, so they don't really hold out that well in the real world.
Yeah, but you have something like, if you try to measure those between countries, what is your thing that you take and do it by?
Well, I would look at I would probably look at some different measures from the OECD. I would look at some of their data, but the inequality measures have to be looked at very, very carefully. Raj Chetty from Harvard has done some very interesting work on this, where he has concluded that inequality has not really increased over time. That's spelled C-H-E-T-T-Y. And he's a Harvard economics professor who's doing a lot of work on this right now. So anyway, labor market reform, product market reform, tax reform, this can all make the economy grow faster and give companies more incentives to produce lower priced goods. There's also, as we mentioned yesterday, better education, and the people in the lowest income group who are poor need to be given opportunities for training in sectors that are going to grow. And this training doesn't have to be government training. It can also be training from employers because they have an incentive to take intelligent people and train them. This requires a good basic education, good math skills, good writing skills at an elementary and a high school level. There have been many examples in countries such as the United States and Germany of apprenticeship programs where people can spend some of their last years working for a company and developing these skills. It is perhaps more difficult in Israel with the army and the 3 years in the army, but it would be possible for apprenticeships to start after the army or to be combined with a university education. So part of the education is at the university, and then part of the education is actually hands-on at a particular company. But it's particularly important for that to happen in terms of raising living standards. The best thing that we can do for people is to give them a good education to enable them to move up the income ladder. But even if we do all that, we're still going to have inequality. This is something that is always going to be with us, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. The United States is the most unequal country in the world. But you see people, millions of people, wanting to come into the United States. They apply all over the world at the consulates. They try and come through the Mexican border. They do everything they can to reach this really unequal country called the United States. Why? Because they see they can get a better job. They see opportunities for themselves to rise up. And it is actually the same in Israel. There are many Arabs who want to come here, who want to get work permits, and they're not able to get work permits. There are people who want to come here to work too. So inequality, I would say, is something that it's always with us, and we shouldn't be worried about it. We should be concerned about people at the bottom and try and give them the skills to get further up the ladder. We should be concerned about having highly priced goods because that makes people's paychecks go less far. They can't buy as much with their paychecks. This is something we should be worried about. We should be worried about labor market regulations that keep people from working and keep people out of the labor market. We shouldn't be worried about inequality. There are a lot of things we can do to fix. We will never fix inequality because it's always going to be with us. Interestingly enough, I was on a panel discussion of inequality, and there was a professor at Georgetown University called Harry Holzer, who was saying how unfair it was that people in finance earn so much money. So I said to him, Harry, is it also unfair that Madonna, the singer, earns so much money? And he said, no, she's earned that money, that's okay. And I named a football player with the Redskins, whose acronym is RG3. And I said, is it unfair RG3 earns so much money? He said, no, that's fine. And he said, it's fine that Steve Jobs earned so much money too, because he made a worthwhile product, the iPhone and the Mac and the computers. So Harry Holzer, who's very much a Democrat, he wasn't against inequality. He was just against, because he was fine with Madonna and the football player and Steve Jobs making money. What really bothered him were these bankers making money. People just don't like bankers, and maybe it's envy, or maybe it's what Dob was talking about, that they take too many risks and they exploit people. But, you know, you ask a lot of people, is it all right if so-and-so earns a lot of money? And if they like them, they say, yes, that's fine. So anyway, with that, I'll finish speaking, and I'm sure I'll take your questions or comments. Yes?
I agree with you that inequality isn't a problem, but I think there's a different problem that's worse, maybe. Because you said a few times that people go up the ladder, and that's why they come to America. They want to go up the ladder, and that's what should happen. But I read in a few places that, I don't know if it's true, maybe you do, that 30 years ago, it was much more easier to start at the bottom and then go up. And now people are stagnant. They just don't go up. You start poor, and there's a much more chance that you'll stay poor. So what do you know about that now?
Right, so some of the really good work on that, again, has been done by Raj Chetty, who said that inequality hasn't increased. We also have to distinguish between absolute mobility and relative mobility. In other words, if you start at the bottom fifth or the second fifth, the question is, are you there in 10 or 20 years? But it doesn't mean that you are at the same income. There's also absolute mobility, where you start in the bottom fifth and you get richer and you do better, but you are still in the bottom fifth. So we have a lot of cases where relative mobility doesn't change, but absolute mobility does. And there's a good study by Jerry Orton of the Treasury, that's A-U-T-E-N, in the National Tax Journal, where he compared, he looked at absolute mobility, how much that changes for 25 and over. In the lowest quintile, he found that the real median income change was up 77%. He found that 20% of the people stayed with the same income, 34% increased by less than 100%, and 46% of the people doubled their income. So we should be more concerned about how we increase in absolute terms, rather than are we getting from quintile, the bottom quintile, to the next quintile. What's important is how much more do people have to spend. If you look at the poor now in America versus the poor 40 years ago, they have better sneakers. They almost all have smartphones. They almost all have internet. They almost all have air conditioning in their houses. All the affordable housing now comes with air conditioning and heating and 2 or 3 bathrooms. It's quite different from what it was 50 years ago. And all right, these people are in the bottom fifth, but compared with people in the bottom fifth 40 or 50 years ago, they are doing tremendously better off. And I would say that that is the most important thing. Furthermore, the quintiles in the United States, it being the most unequal country, are also wider than the quintiles in other countries, where there is more what you call income compression. So given that there's less inequality somewhere like Sweden, it's easier to go from quintile, the bottom quintile, to the second one and then the third. Whereas you might make the same income jump in the United States and still remain in the same fifth of the income distribution. And we need to look at the long-term goal, which is how do we make people richer, How do we make them better off, rather than focusing on what fifth they're in? We had a question over here.
I want to ask about what you were actually saying about the relative and absolute mobilities.
Yeah.
Okay, so I studied economics and psychology. And in psychology, what they keep referring to is the fact that people's well-being isn't measured by what they can buy or perhaps they can get those sneakers. It's measured by where they are in relative to others. Now, I understand clearly, quality of life is improved and the poor are doing much better as are developing. But if our ability to advance from one quintile to the other is harmed or it is diminished in the process, then we are missing out on the opportunity. We don't have equal opportunities, which is really what you're trying to encourage when you're talking about education, is our ability to build, to create our opportunities. So if we've lost that, then isn't this the most fundamental inequality that we should be talking about? Rather, we can be in charge of our own destiny, rather we can make a living no matter where we were born.
Right. Well, as I've shown, there are problems with these income inequality tables. I'm not quite sure I completely agree, and there have been articles, Does Money Buy Happiness is one of them, by Richard Thayer, I think. And they do say that where you are in the income distribution affects your well-being. So it is better to be rich in India, even though you would be a lot poorer, than being in the bottom quintile in the United States, even though someone in the bottom quintile in the United States is better off than someone who is in the top quintile in India. That's the argument. But you see so many people trying to come here from relatively well-off positions in other countries, and you see them willingly enter the bottom income quintile here because they see opportunity for themselves and their children. That I think revealed preference actually contradicts this argument. I mean, there are well-off people in Korea, in China, even in India, who want to come to the United States even though they will be in a lower position in society. You can just look at the data. You can look at all the people applying for visas at the consulates. You can see that. So I know that that is in the textbooks. I know there are economists who say that, but we shouldn't always believe what we read. We should look at what's happening. Yes?
Do you have any particular examples of within the labor market, within the Israeli labor market, of the UN country in an absolute per day, one or two things you would change, and if not, determine the US, just to give us an idea of whether it's the larger issues that, like the actual changes you make?
There's a lot of labor regulations I would get rid of. I'd get rid of or lower the minimum wage, especially for younger people. And I would get rid of mandates on employers, the requirement to provide paid maternity leave, the requirement to provide paid sick leave. I would get rid of all these different requirements, and I would make them negotiable between the employer and the employee. My guess is that you would see hiring, and especially hiring of women, since they tend to come with a lot of mandated benefits, you would see that hiring jump right away. Just the ability to fire somebody without having to do any negotiation makes it a lot easier for an employer to hire somebody. Question, yes?
I wanted to ask about taxes, income taxes. I think I can guess what your answer is going to be, but if we did have to have income taxes in Israel or in the States, how would you apply the policy?
I would agree with previous speakers, and I would just go with a flat tax of 15 or 20%. I understand the top tax rate in Israel is 50%. Contradict me if I'm wrong, but that's still a substantial amount of taxes. It means that it drives income towards the underground economy, the gray economy sector, and it makes life very agreeable for tax accountants and tax lawyers. So I would radically simplify the tax system. I would have write-offs for purchases of plant and equipment. And I would make things much simpler. I would eliminate the capital gains tax. We would just have a simple income tax of 15 or 20%. that you could fill out online relatively simply.
Would you say that no tax at all?
No, because the government does need tax. There are things called public goods, things that only the government can provide, like street lighting and, very importantly, national defense and security and policing. And these things need to be paid for, but I think they can be paid for a lot more simply. Roads, I would say, are not one of these public goods. One can have private companies building roads with tolls these days.
They can be collected not through income tax, other sources of tax.
Could you repeat the question?
So I'm saying you don't have to collect income tax to do that. You can
Actually, well, I mean, some people do recommend a value-added tax, what's called a fair tax, and collecting everything with a value-added tax, which is a tax on consumption. And some people think that is relatively simple tax to collect, but it's not what you call progressive. The thing about a 15% tax is if you earn more, then you pay more tax. With a value-added tax, if you earn more, you pay proportionately less tax because you have more savings. So I would suggest just a 15 or 20% income tax. We have a question from Robert.
It's really just a point of clarification. You said several times that the U.S. has the most unequal. And that would be true if you were just looking at OECD or other high-income countries.
That's right,
in fact,
that's
worldwide, it's worth noting that worldwide, the United States income distribution is about median. And I think in the Western Hemisphere, outside of Canada, it's probably the second most equal. So, I mean, it's worth, I mean, again, I keep saying Mexico. The United States is more like Mexico than Canada. If you look at data like that, you'll see so it's worth noting that when people say, oh, we have the worst income inequality, well, it's worse than Sweden, it's worse than France, but it's not worse than Mexico. It's not worse.
Right, I should clarify in Western countries.
Yeah.
But you do see people from Mexico trying to come to the United States. It's not the reverse. We don't have everyone from the United States going, other kinds of places. We don't find that everyone from America wants to go to live in Sweden because it's more equal, for example.
I'm not sure it's only because of economic reasons. It's pretty dangerous to live in Mexico.
That's right. It's very safe living in. But it's very safe living in Sweden. You don't find people going there. Or Haiti has a very even income distribution too. Everybody's equally poor. But you don't find Americans going to search for equality there. Yes.
Regarding what you said about maternity leave, don't you think that would just make women not want to make children? Isn't that dangerous?
Well, no. I mean, look at the United States. There's no requirement for paid maternity leave, and the fertility rate of American women is higher than any other OECD countries. We have a higher replacement rate in the United States without paid maternity leave. And the reason for that is that if you have paid maternity leave, it's a higher cost to employing women. It's harder for women to get jobs. Also, when these benefits are partly paid for by the government, then tax revenue is involved, and a higher tax rate also discourages both having children and entering the workforce. So there are unintended consequences of these regulations. And the way it's worked out in the United States is it has the highest replacement rate in OECD countries. I have to be careful, I can't say it in the world because Robin is listening.
But what are the employment rates among women? Like, how many women take full jobs in the US comparing to the OECD countries?
Right, so I can find that data for you, probably about...
well, is it lower or the same?
Oh, it's higher than countries that have very lavish maternity leave policies, yes. It's higher than France and Germany and Spain and Italy and many of the core European countries. Yes?
People stated about the week that having a flat tax rate would possibly be more appropriate and help these people, but what would the rate have to be to, at least say we're not going to change, Congress and have the budget and money more, which would be good because the budget a lot of people waste, but beyond that, what would the percentage have to be for the whole population to meet the current revenue? And I'm trying to look up and I can't find the revenue number. But Because 15% and 20% is different. Maybe it's 25%.
Right, exactly, yeah. Well, part of it depends on where you have the cutoff. If you start, usually these flat taxes say the first 20,000 we won't let you pay tax on. So it depends, first of all, on the exemption amount. And then it's difficult to calculate precisely because there's dynamic effects. In other words, there's generally economic growth that relies on it. And what some states have done when they've lowered their taxes is saying, we're going to lower the tax, and then we're going to see where the revenue comes in, and then we're going to adjust it afterwards. And that's probably the right way to go, because no one really knows, when you include growth effects, the precise amount of tax that you need. Also, a lot of people who propose having a flat tax also propose different cuts in government spending. So that might be accompanied also too. If there's no more question, yes?
How easy should it be for an employer to fire someone? I mean,
they should be able to fire them immediately, right away,
tomorrow. Okay, but what about severance packages or anything?
No, right, no severance packages.
No severance package at all. So I mean, so you've got
no severance package required by the government. Different employers might put their own
negotiable.
Right, exactly. They might negotiate severance packages. So you might have a negotiated. Different companies might come up with different policies. So they might say, "I would like to hire you, and we don't fire people immediately, and if we do, we give them 1 month's salary." So it would be part of a compensation package. But this isn't something the government needs to be involved in. You know, the government has a lot of things to do. It has to keep people safe. It has to keep law and order. It has to keep a sound currency. We can't have the government figuring out how much employers have to pay, how much they have to pay individual groups of workers, whether they should be able to fire them, when they should be able to fire them. This is too complicated for the government to do. This is not the government's job.
Getting fired is brutal. It's not as simple as, you know,
well, I've been fired a couple of times myself, and yes, it's brutal, but I went out and found a better job.
And how long did that take?
Well, if you're allowed to fire right away, if you're allowed to fire somebody right away, then it's easier to find the next job, because the next person will be more willing to take you on. I think I got fired in November, and then I wanted to work on my dissertation more, so then I didn't take a job until the next spring. And then I got fired from the George H.W. Bush White House because he lost the election. So I left my job in January, and I didn't start my next job till June. So, you know, there's lots of people who get fired, and you can't rely, if you rely on having a job for life or not be able to be fired, then your productivity isn't high too. I mean, you try a lot harder if you know that your employer can fire you the next day. Yes?
I just want to clarify that point to see what your stance on this is. Would you think that ideally the employers themselves want to offer these severance packages to attract the workers to them, or really in your perspective there shouldn't be any kind of...
I mean, I look at CEOs, they get giant severance packages. Right. They can't be attracted without the giant severance package.
So you're saying that hypothetically you're not opposed to any kind of, if it's contracted between the employer and the employee, you're not saying that there shouldn't necessarily be, you know, contract that would include different terms, but you're just saying you don't want the government to be intervening.
Right, exactly. I would say each employer has to offer a compensation package. So, for example, in the United States, you don't have to offer paid sick leave, you don't have to offer vacation, but most companies offer vacation, they offer sick leave, many of them offer paid maternity leave. Law firms are very much now trying to attract women. Young lawyers, female lawyers, have often in big firms 5 months of paid leave. This is not because the government has required it, it's because this is what the law firms have to do to attract women, and they think that they want to have women. So you find different companies offering different compensation packages. And to get to the best compensation package, you have to have training and skills so you can apply to one of these good jobs. That's why it's great that all of you in school doing so well and getting these advanced degrees. The question over here.
What about legislation that's more like health legislation or Lochner cases? Like, so you brought up the...
Can you say that again? Because I think
you brought up, let's say, a more contemporary case. manicurists, or like I'm thinking back to the,
manicurists, yes.
about 100 years ago, like the bakeries, etc.
Right.
So the concept of the government, it's not, you don't have to be a genius to figure out that working, there's health regulator, like if you work in certain settings, your life expectancy is going to get low. So this isn't a matter
And you need to get paid more, by the way. That's why jobs are on oil rigs, construction, mining, those pay more than jobs in offices.
Right, but if there's just a lot of people, I mean, I'm not, you can say, well, let people take the job if they want, they're free to decide, but the government, it's not complicated for the government to say, that is dangerous, you have to pay people more for that, or that is dangerous, make sure you provide them with security, make sure they're healthy on the job. I don't think the government doesn't know applies to all labor regulations.
Right, I don't think that the government has to say you have to pay people more, because one can observe that these jobs are more highly paid. Construction, for example, is more highly paid than an administrative assistant or a receptionist in an office. The question is, should the government enforce health regulations in mines so that there is not a certain amount of dust in these mines? And I would say probably yes. There are basic health regulations that should be enforced in workplaces. But I think these should be very basic. Anytime you have regulations, then there is an opportunity for corruption, for people to pay off the inspectors, and so these should be kept to a minimum. You and then you. Yes.
I'm afraid that the situation that would arise if we do cancel all these things is that people that are more skilled and more in a better socioeconomic level and so on, so they will get their packages and they will have maternity leave paid and so on. But the people who were trying to get employed, so they'll get stuck in jobs that are kind of a bit like
cleaning ladies.
Slavery, because they really need a job and they can't like take a leave of a few months because they need the money from day to day. It's not like they have savings, and they don't have the power to negotiate too much because they're in a great need. And I don't know if they have the way that I can come and say I have this demand and that demand. I don't know if they have the education to ask for it or the way to ask for it, and they're more afraid that the employer just wouldn't want them. So so now the employer can do whatever it wants with them, and when they'll be very sick, they'll come to work because they don't want to be fired. It looks very, very harsh to me to make this.
So people are going to observe that if they get more skills, then they get a better job and a better compensation package, and that compensation package includes sick leave and vacation and things like that. Interestingly enough, so in the United States you have hourly workers, workers who are paid by the hour, and then you have salary workers, people who are paid on a salary. And oddly enough, President Obama is trying to expand the number of hourly workers, people who have to be paid overtime, who have to keep track of their hours, up from 25,000 to about 50,000, thereby losing a lot of flexibility. Everyone can observe that certain jobs pay more and that they come with different kinds of benefits. And it's up to people to invest in the education to get them. So for example, you would not consider taking a cleaning job. When you were little, you knew that you wanted to go to university and that you wanted to get a job that had a good compensation package. And it's like that with other people also. The one thing that I didn't manage to touch on, and that was discussed a little bit at dinner last night, is education and how important it is to provide good schools. And it's very important that people should be able to have the choice of good schools to which to send their children, and that children should have the choice then of going on to getting a two-year degree, a qualification that will enable them to have one of these good jobs that you are describing. a job where you don't have to come to work when you're sick, a job where you get some paid vacation. But this cannot just be made into a law by the government. It has to be something that is arranged between employers and employees, so that there are more people who are employed at these salaries. But having the access to good education is something that is essential, probably the most essential thing to getting rid of inequality, because it's investing in human capital. Human capital, education, is the most important thing that you have. Right now you might not be earning anything, but the education that you have is going to guarantee you a good career later on in the years ahead.
So I really should take care of good schools first, I think, and then take all the goods away from jobs.
Right, exactly, yes. And you need not just a choice of schools, but a choice of accredited schools. One of the speakers yesterday said if people were allowed to choose their own schools, some people would choose schools where you learn only Torah and you only have a low education in mathematics. So I went up to him afterwards and I said, Eugene, what if these schools were accredited and that every school had to include writing and math ability so that the students would graduate and have a good level with math and computers and writing? He said, well, that would be all right. Then we could let parents choose the school.
Should they be heavily subsidized?
Should the schools be subsidized? Well, ideally, I would give parents a voucher and allow them to choose a school of their choice, and so they would be subsidized, but they would be, the school of the parents' choice. Because imagine if you just had one chain of restaurant all over the country, and you could only go to that one restaurant. That wouldn't be very good food, but all the restaurants compete and a bad one goes out of business. It's the same way the schools. Schools should be required to compete for students, and subsidized or not, the important part is competition. One of the just terrible injustices about the United States is that parents are forced to send their children to schools with only a 55% graduation rate, where a little more than half of them graduate in 4 years. They are told they have to send their child to the neighborhood school. They don't have any choice about it, and that really relegates them to poor job opportunities later on.
How are you going to make sure this education is actually good? If you're nurturing, everything's the same price. You can't be playing around with a school which have better teachers or better stuff. They're all the same thing.
Right. So there's one state, actually 2 states in the United States, Louisiana and Nevada, have said that where the tax money for education will follow the child. So the child chooses one particular school, the state government sends the tax money to that school. And I believe that the Jerusalem School District was looking at some kind of system like that also. When I was here about 2 years ago, I spoke to somebody who was trying to also make that happen. Nevada is the other state where Governor Sandoval has just signed into law a requirement that the tax money follow the child. And this is something that could be put in place easily. If the government is paying tax money for a child, it doesn't have to go to that particular school in the child's neighborhood. It can go to whatever school the child's parents or the child chooses, as long as these schools receive accreditation and pass certain requirements in terms of teaching. So in Washington, D.C. now we have a lot of what's called charter schools, which are schools people can choose, and there's Washington Latin School where you can go and learn a classical curriculum. There's a Hebrew immersion school, which by the way is not a Jewish school. You can go and you can learn Hebrew. Everything is in Hebrew right from a very early age. There's a Chinese immersion school where you can go and learn everything in Chinese from a very, very early age. So these schools are competing to get students, and the money is paid for by the DC government. The money follows the child. Let's take Cuba then.
I have a question on a different subject. Sure. You've worked in the state, with the administration.
Yeah.
So yesterday we heard mainly 2 problems with changing or reforming the structure of of the Israeli economy. One is we have strong pressure groups who control the politicians or have a lot of political power, and so it's hard to change. And the other is an economic culture or a sentiment we have in the Israeli people that isn't necessarily connected with facts or, I mean, any basis, but it's more, I don't know, comes from the economic papers maybe, or, I mean, the media, or different places, I mean, maybe from the history of Israel. So how can you, I mean, I don't know, change these two weak points?
It takes people like you, it takes a lot of effort, and Robert talked about the first changes that occurred in Chile, in Canada, even in Britain during Margaret Thatcher's time. There was big changes in the United States from the end of the Carter administration from 80 to 85. So these things can happen. It just takes political will and people standing up saying, well, electing a new set of politicians and saying that it has to come. And all you young people have to get together to do that. That's why you are so important. It's been done in other countries and it can be done here. Yes.
So if you took the minimum wage and dropped it to a level in the United States that really allowed almost full employment of the lowest skilled workers, to be honest, I look at someone who's bagging groceries, whether they're a teenager or whether they're someone who's in their 40s, the same thing. It's a skillless spot that I'm treated as I can do on my own and normally do on my own. So I don't really want to pay someone for that. So if I am, it would be an exorbitantly low amount. How does someone who do owe the minimum wage, people in those situations, how does someone then go and earn enough to build on their human capital? They're already 20 years old, for whatever, they were born into whatever circumstance, and they didn't build their human capital, or possibly they couldn't. What do they do now?
Well, bagging groceries always used to be a kind of, summer job. That's it's a sort of add-on job that someone would get in the summer to do. I mean, so there are some jobs that would just be done part-time, and the biggest example is fast food. The largest component of minimum wage workers are in the fast food and hospitality industry. Our waiters get paid $2.15 an hour. There's especially low wage for waiters because they get tips on top of that. And the other wage is $7.25. So people take these jobs on a short-term basis, and it's frequently young people. There's practically no minimum. There's 3 million people on the federal minimum wage right now, and about half of those are under 24 years old. And these tend to be temporary jobs. Because to get someone to stay longer, you have to pay them more. And again, we should remember that just with the butcher and the baker not providing meat and bread out of the kindness of their hearts, employers do not pay wages, or give sick leave, or give maternity leave, or give vacation because they're kind. Employers are not kind. They just do it because that's the only way they can retain people. These law firms that give the 5 months paid maternity leave, they're only doing it because they found that women weren't becoming partners. And the firms were criticized for just having partners that were male. So they thought, well, we have to do something about it. We have to avoid criticism. We'll give them 5 months paid maternity leave, and then they'll stay. Well, sure enough, more of them are staying. And we're not going to make them, afterwards, we're not going to make them bill so many hours. We'll allow them to work 3/4 time. In America, 3/4 time for a lawyer is 9 to 5. Usually they stay much later. So law firms are doing that now. They're not doing it because they're nice. They're doing it because they were criticized for just having all male partners. So people are going to pay more and have different compensation packages because that's what they have to do to get Kyle to work for them.
But whether it was the $3 or the $5 that pays some good minimum jobs, the 1.2 to 1.4 million Americans that work at Walmart, the real majority do stay in their jobs for periods at a time. We're about to go up to $9 an hour.
Oh, Walmart's a very popular place to work. In fact, I wrote an article. Walmart opened 2 stores in DC just recently, about a year or 2 ago. And the number of applicants they had was immense for those jobs. And I worked out that it was harder to get a job in Walmart than it was to get into Harvard, Princeton, or Yale. They took a smaller percentage of applicants than did Harvard, Princeton, and Yale.
I'm not saying people don't want to work there. I'm saying how does someone pull themselves from that spot to something more.
No, because you can work your way up at Walmart. You can work your way up at Walmart. You start as a greeter and then you move up and you get discounts and then you can become a manager. In fact, the CEO of Walmart started off loading trucks.
Well, the new CEO kind of conversated CEO-ship in a different manner, but
No, the current CEO of Walmart, Doug somebody or other, started off loading trucks. You what?
He's married his wife to family.
Didn't he start out loading trucks though?
He did, but he didn't marry Walmart.
I see. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you for letting me know. That probably helps.